Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. From November 25th, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, to December 10th, Human Rights Day, the Global 16 Days campaign calls for an action to end violence against women. Across Canada, at least one woman or girl is killed every 2 days, according to the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability. Advocates are calling for gender-based violence to be recognized as an epidemic. Our guest tonight is one of those advocates, a former BC Minister of State for Child Care, Katrina Chen. And this conversation is brought to you by Pacific Sands Beach Resort in Tofino, laid-back luxury, as beachfront as it gets. So, Katrina, you co-signed a letter from the YWCA to BC Premier David Eby, basically asking him to declare gender-based violence as an epidemic. Can you explain why this horrible thing should be considered an epidemic?
Of course. When you think about it, gender-based violence is the most pervasive, persistent, and most widespread human rights violation across Canada, across the world, in human history. You can barely think of anything else that has been so persistent and so devastating that has touched so many people's lives. So we should call it for what it is. It is an epidemic. And statistically, if you look at in Canada, about a girl, a woman, or more every 2 days right here in Canada are being killed because of violence. Right here in BC, about 30% of women have been touched by physical or sexual violence. About half of women have experienced some forms of violence, whether it's emotional or abuse or trauma. And then the statistics actually goes way higher for Indigenous women and women of color. So that's call it for what it is.
Survivors of gender-based violence, they have many challenges in terms of navigating both the culture and the legal and justice system. There may be people at home thinking, who have not experienced this, thinking, well, if you're in this situation, just get out and go through the legal system. Can you explain why it's not as simple as that and some of the barriers that exist for women?
There's definitely many barriers. I'm sure we've all watched a movie where a survivor, a victim, a woman is being questioned in court because of what happened, the violence against them, or being questioned about their character. What was she wearing? Why was she out late at night? Victim blaming. And there's, some people may say, oh, there's two sides of the story. We don't know what happened. And we even had a former BC politician actually in a leadership position that has called domestic violence tough marriages. I don't know if people remember that. So there is definitely a barrier and a stigma and challenges for survivors to come forward, to share their story. And I always say that it's so important that when you have a wound, you need to open it up and to let it heal, to look at it, to face it before you can find a treatment to treat your trauma. But for gender-based violence, it's still a topic that so many people find it really difficult to talk about. So the society needs change, and that's why we need to call it an epidemic and really to talk about what gender-based violence is. And then we look at core system reform because survivors tend to be re-traumatized through the process. Many survivors have shared that they have to share their stories over a dozen times through the court process or through applications, and that is just re-traumatizing of victims.
We're currently in the 16 days of action. Aside from the province declaring gender-based violence an epidemic, what other kind of reforms are you and other advocates looking for?
There's definitely a lot has to be done. First of all, like I mentioned, we need to have a public conversation about it, whether it's through our K-12 education, post-secondary, at our workplaces, at home with our children, to inform people about what gender-based violence it is and how it touches so many people in our community around us. Many survivors, including myself, have faced that challenge of coming forward to share our story. I had a childhood trauma that I never talked about until in my late 30s when I was touched by violence again. So we need to really think about how can we create a safe space for people to share this. And of course, at the same time, we need more prevention and support for victims and survivors who are experiencing violence or have been impacted by violence, and also their families. We need to look at court reform as well. The court process often re-traumatizes victims and survivors. How can we make sure it's more trauma-informed? For example, intimate partner violence is a very frequent, common form of gender-based violence. And survivors often has to go through family court and criminal court separately. And why can we not have an integrated court like many other jurisdictions have to ensure that it's survivor-centered, trauma-informed process for survivors to go through.
So this is being done in other jurisdictions. It's not that
Yes.
we're completely starting from new.
No, there's many other good examples across the world about how can we better support survivors and also ensure that there's proper conversation and training and trauma-informed practices for survivors.
Let's say there's someone watching the show right now who is impacted by this either directly or they know someone. What are the first things that they should be doing here in BC? What are the resources or supports, or what would you recommend them do to get out of that situation?
There's definitely many organizations that can provide support, such as YWCA that we talked about is leading this campaign to call it an epidemic. There is BWSS, Better Women Support Services, and many other organizations that provide such support. But if you know someone or you are at risks of violence or experiencing violence, make sure you get help right away. Either call 911 or to contact some local organizations. And I do understand it is very hard sometimes to take that first step to get help. Depending, gender-based violence can be very complex. Maybe talk to a trusted friend, share the story, like I mentioned, unpack your wound, open it up, talk about it, and then take the steps to get those resources and the help that you need. We do need to make sure there's enough actions and support for survivors to end this tremendous and very widespread human rights violation.
Katrina, I know that this is not an easy subject to talk about, but it is a very important subject. So I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much. And thank you for all that you're doing on behalf of victims and survivors.
Thank you so much for having me.
Folks, the former BC Minister of State for Child Care, Katrina Chen. Thank you so much to Pacific Sands Beach Resort in Tofino for supporting local conversations about very serious and very important issues that affect all of our communities. Now, after some business, we're going to end on a lighter note, taking a suggestion from one of our viewers. Kyla's Court is up next.